Thank you, Reggie and Carol. That actually was a sermon, wasn't it? The words of that song. There is so much to love about Thanksgiving as a national holiday. Unlike the December holidays right around the corner, we don't have to buy presents. There aren't houses to decorate and no cards to feel bad about not sending. Instead, there are family and friends who gather. There is good, plentiful food. There are family traditions. There are opportunities to be of community service. There's football on television, and one of my favorites, the Macy's Day Parade. Thanksgiving at its best reminds us that no matter what is going on, we must take the time to be grateful for all the glories of our lives. I love that Thanksgiving is celebrated by almost all people in the United States with gatherings, family, friends, food, memories, and laughter. I like that it's not a religious holiday, but it contains a uniquely sacred message. We are blessed by our time, by our moments, by each other. That being present to each other, sharing food, saying, I love you, saying aloud, I am thankful for you and this time together. That's holy and sacred. I'm guessing that almost all of us learned the same myth of Thanksgiving, of the coming together to share tools, to share a meal, and to share the bounties of the season. And yes, that was a myth. Because the idyllic story we learned in elementary school about the Pilgrims and the New England Native Americans living in peace together and sharing Thanksgiving was largely an invention of the advent of children's history textbooks in the late 1800s. Most of us learned a story about a meal between about 50 English colonists and about 90 Wampanoagan, which took place in the first fall harvest in 1621. The actual documentation of that event is only 3 paragraphs long. And how the meal came about depends on whether a Native American or a white historian was telling the story. It's unclear from the history whether white people invited the Native Americans to the meal, like most of us were taught, or whether it was Indian scouts who came upon the white settlers enjoying a feast and decided that they would chip in their deer to the meal. What we do know is that that meal lasted 3 days. It didn't include turkey, but that deer was at the top of the menu. Yes, there was corn and pumpkin, but there were no sweet potatoes, which were not yet grown in Massachusetts, nor was there cranberry sauce because sugar was not available and the cranberries would have been inedible. That meal appears to have only happened once. Now, that might be enough myth busting for you, but the true story of the first declared Thanksgiving is actually quite tragic. In 1637, the Massachusetts colonial governor, John Winthrop, proclaimed the first day of Thanksgiving to celebrate a massacre of 700 Pequot Indians in Mystic, Connecticut. A band of colonial settlers had gone to Connecticut to hunt, but upon hearing of a white man who had been found murdered, they set about to get revenge, and they killed an entire native village of men, women, and children. They returned to Massachusetts with the head of one of the chiefs, which, according to several histories I read, was placed on a stick for display in the colonies for many years. That massacre was only the beginning of deliberate attacks on Native Americans, which culminated in war being declared on them in 1675. Ever since 1970, Indigenous people from all over New England gather at Plymouth Rock, not to celebrate Thanksgiving, but to honor a day of mourning. So some progressive people suggest that we abandon Thanksgiving in much the same way that we have abandoned Columbus Day. It seems impossibly insensitive and unjust to celebrate what we know now is the beginning of genocide, rape, and exploitation of an entire people. But, and you may be surprised to hear me say this, I'm not ready to give up the Thanksgiving that's been handed down to me. Although now that I know these facts, I've always thought about it differently. Because as I've told you in my sermons before, there are the true stories, and then there are the, I hope you just said it in your home, the truth stories, the stories that reveal something to us about the human condition and how we are to live our lives. So the truth story of Thanksgiving is one of diversity, unification, welcoming all to the table, and saying thank you to all that is good in our lives. The truth story are your own family traditions, whether that's working at the shelter, going for a hike, playing touch football on the lawn, watching the parade, sweet potatoes with marshmallows or sweet potatoes without, homemade cranberry sauce, or that wonderful stuff that I personally like from the can. The truth story is what Meister Eckhart said more than 800 years ago. The only prayer you'll ever need is thank you. The poet Rumi wrote, wear gratitude like a cloak, and it will feed every corner of your life. So this morning, I want to share with you another truth story this Thanksgiving, and that appears to have Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, and Chinese versions. In European versions of the story, the pot contains a plentiful stew. In Asian versions, it's a pot of rice. So I'm going to tell you the Jewish version. A famous rabbi was taken by a guide to see heaven and hell. First, they went to hell, and the sight was horrifying. Rows and rows of tables were laden with platters of sumptuous food, and yet the people around the table were pale and emaciated and moaning in hunger. The people were cranky and angry and mean. And then as the rabbi came closer, he understood their predicament. See, every person had a full spoon, but both arms were splinted with a wooden slat, so they could not bend their elbow to bring the food to their mouth. You get the idea? It broke the rabbi's heart to hear the tortured groans of these people as they held their food so near, but couldn't eat it. And next, the rabbi was taken to visit heaven. It was the exact same setting as in hell. Row after row of long tables laden with food. But in contrast to hell, the people in heaven were content, talking to each other, sated from a sumptuous meal. They were kind and happy and caring. So as the rabbi came closer, he was amazed to discover that there too, each person had their arms splinted on wooden slats that kept them from bending their elbows. How then did they manage to eat? And as he watched, a woman picked up her spoon, put it in the dish ahead of her, and stretched it out across the table to feed the person across from her. The recipient of this kindness thanked her and returned the favor by leaning across the table to feed her. And they smiled and they thanked each other and they ate. They said thank you for the wonderful food and for their companionship. They were grateful. The rabbi suddenly understood. Heaven and hell offer the same circumstances and conditions, just like here on earth. The difference is the way that the people treat each other. The way people treat each other. So in hell, people were too self-absorbed, too self-interested to realize that they could take turns feeding each other. In heaven, they had figured out that we are all in this together. They took care of each other and they offered thanks. I found this poem by Reverend Gary Kowalski that spoke to me. He wrote, grateful this Thanksgiving in differing ways, gathered in our separate families, each with our own distinct recipes, customs, and traditions. For some will have pies of mince and others of pumpkin or apple. And some will dine early and some sit down late to the meal, passing on the wisdom of the elders. As to the question of whether the stuffing should have raisins or currants and whether to add sage to the gravy, for such differences of opinion make us truly appreciative, realizing that there is no one right way to celebrate the gifts of life, just as there is no wrong way to share in love and friendship. But amid our diversity, let us also be united in our gratitude for a world in which there are many faiths, a nation in which there is still freedom of religion and freedom of worship, a community in which people of many backgrounds can gather in mutual care and respect. So that, my friends, that's my Thanksgiving wish to you. May we whisper thank you for all that is good in our lives. Thank you. May we shout thank you for the abundance of blessings we celebrate. Thank you. May we feel thank you, thank you, thank you deep within your hearts, all around us right now. May we be thankful, so thankful, thankful deep into our bones for this time together. May we take the time to feed each other, take care of each other, appreciate each other, trust each other, and may we say thank you. It's the only prayer we'll ever need.